Story 1. A father-daughter photo shows Franklin Delano Floyd and a girl who was one of the woman's children. Floyd had married the woman and obtained custody of her children while she was in prison for 30 days. He decided to take that girl to start a new life with him, leaving her siblings behind. 2 went to foster care and 1 infant was never found. The photo was taken shortly after they moved, when he claimed her as his biological daughter and changed their names. He later married her. The case involves other abductions, murder, and kidnappings. Floyd is a disturbing individual, and the photo is eerie given the story behind it. Story 2. An old violin is being sold at auction. At $1.5 million, it is one of the most valuable violins in the world, not because of who made it but because of who played it. Wallace Hartley, the lead violinist on the Titanic, played this instrument the night the ship sank. He died that night, and the violin was later found floating in the debris field. Children play on a street in Pripyat. The entire city was forcibly evacuated after the explosion at the nearby Chernobyl nuclear reactor. This old photo, taken in 1924 during one of the first British expeditions to Mount Everest, shows George Mallory and Sandy Irvine. Shortly after it was taken, the 2 men attempted the summit. Mallory's body was found in 1999. Irvine has never been found. Story 3. Alan Ruby, a freshman at the University of Oklahoma in 2014, murdered his entire family on a Friday. The next day, he drove to Dallas for the University of Oklahoma versus the University of Texas football game, where he stayed in a hotel with his friends and posted a candid photo on Instagram, which I assume was an attempt to build an alibi. That did not work. He quickly confessed and received multiple life sentences. I cannot imagine what the people in this photo, and others who were probably in that hotel room, must have felt when they learned what had happened. Story 4. I have just spent 4 hours on this thread and honestly I have creeped myself out. Story 5. I am late, but this image shows a 23-year-old woman hitchhiking while carrying her infant son as she searched for an apartment on Mother's Day. The photo was posted in a local newspaper. It is tragic because it may be the last photograph of her alive. Less than 4 months later, she was killed by her husband during a fight. Between the photograph and her death, their son was placed in foster care and was later adopted by his foster parents. Story 6. This image is from the 1988 Gladbeck hostage crisis in Germany. The person on the left is a robber. The person on the right is a hostage who was killed while police were taking action to end the crisis. On the first day, 2 men robbed a bank and took several people hostage. They demanded a getaway car and were given a white Audi and 300,000 German marks. They took 2 hostages with them in the car. Later, one robber's sister boarded the car. News reporters followed them. The next day, the robbers hijacked a bus carrying 32 passengers. A few times they allowed a reporter onto the bus to interview them. At one point, a robber left the bus to give an interview, and the bus can be seen in the background. He said he did not care what would happen and that he would kill himself. Later, they released some hostages and drove away. They stopped at a gas station, where the robber's sister went to the restroom and was arrested by police. When the robber learned of the arrest, he demanded 5 minutes to free her or he would kill a hostage. She was released, but while she was returning to the bus, an Italian teenager was killed by the robbers. He had been protecting his younger sister. He might have survived if an ambulance had been nearby. That night, they drove the bus to the Netherlands. Dutch police demanded that younger hostages be released first before accepting any concessions from the robbers. After some hostages were released, the Dutch police provided the robbers with a car manufactured by Bavarian Motor Works that included a remote control device. The robbers took 2 hostages and drove back to Germany. They were later surrounded by many journalists who took numerous photographs. While driving on a highway, German police rammed the hostage car. The remote control had been left elsewhere and was not used. One hostage escaped from the highway. The other was shot and killed. The driver later claimed in an interview that police bullets killed the hostage. German police denied this and said a robber's bullet hit the hostage. The police and the media were heavily criticized afterward. Police for failing to act decisively, and the media for obstructing police operations by getting too close to the suspects. Story 7. This was a case in Denmark a couple of years ago. The woman was a Swedish journalist who was invited by the man to go with him in his home-built submarine. This was one of the last pictures of her before he killed her and dumped her mutilated body in different places underwater to hide it. A disturbed man with a deeply troubled mind. Story 8. This picture shows the Russian ambassador to Turkey, Andrei Karlov, standing in an art gallery about to give a speech. Behind him is Mevlut Mert Altintas, the man who is about to assassinate him. Story 9. One of the Auschwitz employees. Story 10. I know this thread is a little old, but some morbid readers may find this fascinating. The photo is of Issei Sagawa, a cannibal from Japan. The photo was taken for a Japanese magazine after he was released from custody for insanity. He appeared frequently on talk shows, reviewed restaurants for magazines, and acted in horror films. He wrote a book about his murder of Renee Hartevelt that describes in explicit detail how he conflated eating her with a romantic act. Warning: this material is disturbing and may stay with you. Story 11. This shows Mike Hawthorne and Ivor Webb celebrating with champagne after winning the 24-hour Le Mans. It refers to the 1955 Sierra Leonean Leone's Mans, during which 84 people, mostly spectators, were killed in a crash that was at least partly caused by Hawthorne. Here is an old British Path news video about the race which includes footage of the crash. Story 12. Last image of Sydney Luff before she was murdered by her Tinder date. She had been cut into 14 pieces, and part of her upper left arm was never found. Her body was brought to the morgue in 6 separate bags. Story 13. This picture was taken by the crew of a ship who saw an 11-year-old girl floating on a disintegrating life raft. Her entire family had been murdered on a sailboat by their hired captain, who left her to drown as the boat sank. She miraculously survived and drifted for 4 days with no water and no food, suffering severe sunburn. When the captain learned she had survived, he killed himself. Story 14. An article shows a photo of 3 girls smiling together in a selfie. The light on the right-hand side of the photo is the headlight of the train that hit them moments later. Story 15. Here are over 100 pictures taken by Rodney Alcala, also known as the dating game killer. He posed as a photographer and convinced people to model for him in remote locations. It is unknown how many people he killed. Any of these photos could show his victims. Story 16. The top photo looks like a police officer relaxing. He was an imposter posing as a police officer who, when the photo was taken, had just been arrested after killing 77 people, including approximately 60 children and teenagers, and injuring about 250 others. He detonated a bomb in the city that killed 8 people, then went to an island where a youth camp was held and opened fire. People on the island were trapped and had to swim to escape. Some children who did not know who was shooting approached him for safety because he was dressed as a police officer, and he shot them. Story 17. At their wedding, Stephen and Katie Plattle posed for a photograph with several family members. Katie, who was both Stephen's pregnant wife and his biological daughter. Grace, Stephen's mother, who was also Katie's mother-in-law and paternal grandmother, and Katie's adoptive parents. He later murdered Katie, the unborn child, and her adoptive father, then killed himself. Story 18. The man dressed as Santa Claus in the picture is Bruce MacArthur. He worked as a landscaper for most of the year and as the Agincourt Mall Santa during the holiday season. Between 2010 and 2017, he lured men to meet him via a dating app, murdered them, and spread their remains among planter boxes at properties he managed. He was found guilty of 8 counts of first-degree murder and is serving life in prison. Story 19. Sarah Funk, a YouTube vlogger, is filming her trip to the Red Lake in Cyprus. In the picture, a suitcase floats in the water. 2 years later, it is revealed that the suitcase contained the body of a 12-year-old girl. Authorities suspect she was murdered. Story 20. This man took a photograph of a bear while in the woods. Shortly after he took that photograph, he was killed by the same bear. Story 21. Photo of downtown Manhattan seconds before the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks. The artist Wolfgang Stahl was projecting a live recording of the Manhattan skyline as part of a gallery show the week of September 6, 2001. His webcam recorded the events of September 11th unfold in real time. Given the low fidelity of early webcams, his recording is a live feed of the September 11th attacks in freeze frames. Stale inadvertently captured the first plane crashing into the World Trade Center and some of the only footage of that first impact. Story 22. A 17-year-old went missing on the morning of February 27th after telling family members he planned to hike Haiku Stairs, also known as the Stairway to Heaven. One of the photos the teenager sent to his family during the hike showed a man. After studying the pictures, the family noticed the man and is asking the public for help identifying him. They hope he may have information that could lead to Pua's location. Story 23. This photograph was found on the camera of two vacationers who were swept away in the 2004 tsunami. The disaster resulted in more than 230,000 deaths. Story 24. This is a photo of John List and his family. In 1971, John List shot and killed his mother, his wife, and his children in their New Jersey home. Earlier that year, he had lost his job and was unable to provide the abundant lifestyle the family had been accustomed to. He viewed this as a personal failure. He hid the loss of his job from his family. He attempted to find employment, but nothing matched his previous salary. He remained unemployed and continued leaving the house as if he were going to work while skimming his mother's account to cover expenses. Once those funds began to run dry, he decided to kill them. In his view, going on welfare would have been too humiliating, so he instead believed he was sending their souls to heaven. He methodically murdered each family member, moved their bodies to the same room, and cleaned the scenes. He canceled deliveries, told the children's teachers they were on vacation, and emptied what remained in the bank. He even cut himself out of family photos to avoid leaving any trace of himself. He spent one last night in the home and left the next morning with the lights on and organ music playing through the house's intercom system. Due to List's ruses and the family's reclusive nature, the bodies were not discovered for a month. By then, List had long been gone. He evaded authorities for 18 years. It was not until prosecutors commissioned a forensic artist to produce an age-progressed bust of List that a neighbor recognized him and contacted the authorities. He had been living under an assumed identity in Colorado, employed as an accountant and remarried. List was sentenced to 5 terms of life imprisonment. When asked why he had not killed himself, he replied that suicide was a sin and he wanted to be reunited with his family in heaven. He died in custody of complications from pneumonia in 2008. The List home was a mansion. The room where the bodies were placed was a ballroom. Directly above them was a Tiffany skylight worth $100,000 at the time of the killings, more than enough to have prevented their financial ruin. The case is senseless and tragic. Story 25. Ayano Tokumasu, a person wearing a red sweater in the background, lost her footing while posing for a picture and fell into Niagara Falls. Story 26. These are pictures of Dutch girls in Panama. The girls got lost in the jungle and were missing for days. A few months later, a backpack containing the camera and these photos was found. Clarification: the reference link was to an Imager album with the photos, which also includes the story in its description. I did not create the album. The photos initially appear innocuous, showing 2 girls on a trip, so I believe it fits the original poster's request. Story 27. Federal Bureau of Investigation seeking information images. These images show everyday objects and scenes. By helping to identify them, you could aid in rescuing a child. Pictures of people the Federal Bureau of Investigation would like to speak with about their involvement in pornography. Note: I post this periodically to raise awareness. I am not affiliated with law enforcement. I would like these children rescued and these offenders removed from society. Thanks to Reddit users Rigby and SKXU for linking to the Trace and Object subreddit, the Europol version of this. Thanks to Peter Van Sika for referencing the Europol Stop Child Abuse campaign. Story 28. This was a light-hearted vlog in which a man filmed his sleeping wife. Later, it was discovered that she had passed away. Story 29. Some images were submitted by Europol as part of their Trace and Object initiative. The subreddit Trace and Object hosts most of them. They are cropped images of clothing, backgrounds, or objects that appear in photographs associated with child sexual exploitation. These images are posted when investigators have no other leads and believe that identifying even the country where an object was produced or sold could help. I strongly advise sitting down before viewing these images. Although the cropped images show only everyday items and are not explicit, they are distressing because the removed parts contain horrific images of child exploitation. Many people still view them in the minute chance they can identify an object and help investigators bring aid to a child and achieve justice. Story 30. Rosalind Carter, First Lady to President Jimmy Carter, was photographed not only with John Wayne Gacy but also with Jim Jones, the leader of the Jonestown Massacre. Those photos could be the kind you see on office walls or in restaurants, but because of later events they carry sinister connotations. Story 31. This picture of David A. Johnston was taken 13 hours before the eruption of Mount St. Helens in 1980. His last words over the radio were, "Vancouver, Vancouver, this is it." He went silent afterward, and his remains were never found. Story 32. It is the last picture taken of 18-year-old Jolie Callan by her ex-boyfriend before he shot her twice in the head and pushed her body off the cliff. Story 33. Last known photo of Liberty German and Abigail Williams. It looks like two girls out on an adventure together. I pray their killer is caught and that they receive justice. Story 34. This is a picture of a young woman holding a dog and crouching on the ground on Saddleworth Moor in northern England. That is Myra Hindley. The photograph was taken by Ian Brady. Together they tortured and murdered 6 children in the 1960s before burying them on the moors near Manchester. In the picture she is crouching and staring at the grave of 12-year-old John Kilbride. Story 35. The photograph Tragedy by the Sea was taken in 1954 in Hermosa Beach, California, my hometown, after a couple's 19-month-old son was dragged out by the sea. Story 36. The photo shows the Uruguay rugby team on the plane before takeoff. In 1972, a plane carrying a rugby team and their family crashed in the Andes Mountains. The survivors were stranded for months and were forced to resort to cannibalism. Some were later called monsters despite having done everything they could to survive after returning to civilization. Book, Alive. Story 37. Here is a man and a woman in the 1970s on a game show called The Dating Game. The smiling man had just won a date with the woman. That man is serial killer Rodney Alcala. Story 38. My town had a painting of people and other figures on display for a couple of years. It was cool and I was glad the town was showing more murals. But several years later, word got out that it was actually a depiction of a lynching in the heart of town. The mural was taken down quickly. I can't remember what the artist said about it. The artist later said his painting depicted monsters and how we should not act. The city removed it for fear of misinterpretation. Press F to pay respects. Story 39. This still image was taken from a diver's helmet camera. The diver, instructor Yuri Lipsky, was checking the red filter and lens on his helmet camera in preparation for a dive at the Blue Hole near Dahab, Egypt. However, possibly due to a malfunction of his buoyancy compensator or overweighting because of the camera and other equipment, he descended more than 100 meters, about 330 feet, below the surface during the dive without a proper gas mix, experienced seizures caused by hyperoxia, and drowned. When his body was recovered from the bottom a few days later, investigators discovered that his video camera had recorded the tragedy from the beginning of the dive, including his death. Story 40. I always think of this picture of Istvan Reiner. I found it on Reddit several years ago. They dressed him in a uniform, photographed him, and knew what his fate would be. He was reportedly killed in a gas chamber 2 weeks later. Story 41. Christina's World is a famous painting by Andrew Wyeth. In the foreground, a woman lies on the grass. A farmhouse stands in the distance. The painting is gorgeously detailed and hangs in the Museum of Modern Art. I spent some time with it, marveling at the brushstrokes and realism. The placard explained that Christina was a solitary woman, a farm owner who had suffered from an illness and could not walk. She crawled everywhere and endured a grim life. Story 42. I do not know how to link stories, But the picture of Tyler Hadley in his kitchen holding a solo cup during a party is chilling. He had just killed his parents, and their bodies were in the house while he hosted the party. Story 43. Payne Stewart's Learjet before its final flight. In 1999, professional golfer Payne Stewart, 3 other passengers, and 2 crew members took off from Orlando, Florida, for Dallas, Texas, en route to the Professional Golfers Association Tour Championship practice rounds. Shortly after takeoff, the aircraft rapidly lost cabin pressure, causing everyone aboard to succumb to hypoxia, a lack of oxygen. After climbing well past its assigned altitude, all the way to 50,000 feet, and straying from its flight path, the plane was intercepted by fighter jets from the United States Air Force. The intercepting pilots monitored the situation, noting that the windows were iced and fogged, and that the flight crew remained unresponsive. After several hours, with the plane nearing the Canadian border and on course to Winnipeg, the Royal Canadian Air Force was given orders to shoot the plane down. In the end, the plane came down in South Dakota after running out of fuel. Numerous tributes were held for Payne Stewart, his fellow passengers, and the aircraft crew. An in-depth investigation found that Learjet was not responsible for the deaths. Story 44. The Colt clan case in Australia involved an incest case that spanned 4 generations of a family living in rural New South Wales. Several family photographs were published. The most upsetting part is the way it was discovered. A child reported overhearing another child at a local primary school speaking of an unkempt girl living in the bush who was pregnant with a child fathered by a brother. The child overheard the girl say that one of her sisters was pregnant and they did not know which of her brothers was the father. It was a real mess when it broke, yet many Australians know nothing about it. Story 45. This is a picture of Travis Alexander taken by Jodi Arias the evening she murdered him. Story 46. The burst of joy photograph shows a prisoner of war returning from Vietnam being enthusiastically greeted by his children. His wife appears in the picture, but in reality the day he was released she gave him a Dear John letter because she had found someone else while he was in prison. Story 47. A photograph from a hiking trip shows an injured woman in the background. She and a friend had gone hiking and slipped off a waterfall. They were too injured to move and remained there for a day before being found. The woman in the photograph survived, but by the time they were rescued her friend had already died. There is a Reddit discussion about this. Note: as many people have seen this, always take precautions when hiking, climbing, or otherwise going out into nature. Wear eye-catching clothing, take care around dangerous terrain, and tell someone where you are going. Stay safe. The wording of the first line has been changed. Story 48. I remember an earlier thread with this topic, and this was one of the most memorable. It looks like an ordinary photo of a father happy to see his daughter graduate. However, the man on the left is Dennis Rader, also known as the Bind, Torture, Kill Killer. He murdered 10 people over approximately 25 years while being a beloved member of his community. He was a security system technician, a Cub Scout leader, a church president, a city worker, and a happily married father of 2. And he was also a sadistic serial killer. The idea that any normal-looking person you see on the street could actually be a psychopath really gives me the creeps. Posted by user Supakupa714. Story 49. This photograph was taken before the Omagh bombing in Northern Ireland. Almost immediately afterward, a bomb detonated in the red car beside the boy who sat on his father's shoulders. The father and child survived miraculously. The photographer and 28 others were killed, and about 220 people were injured. Story 50. Ayrton Senna was watching footage of Roland Ratzenberger's fatal crash at the San Marino Grand Prix on April 30, 1994. 24 hours later, he would meet a similar fate. These were the first driver deaths in the sport in 10 years. Story 51. The Radio Corporation of America Victor logo, a painting of a dog looking into a gramophone titled His Master's Voice, was inspired when the painter inherited his brother's dog and noticed that the dog was intrigued by a recording of its late owner's voice. Story 52. The Columbine High School senior class photograph looks normal until you notice 2 students in the top left corner who appear to be pointing a gun. It becomes more disturbing when you learn those students are Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. Story 53. This is a picture of a man who drowned after an underwater marriage proposal to his girlfriend. It is one of the saddest stories I have read in a while. Story 54. Two brothers pose for a photo in Sequoia National Park moments before being struck by lightning in August 1975. Story 55. The last photograph of John Lennon before he was shot to death on December 8, 1980. The other person in the image is his killer. Lennon was signing a copy of his latest album, Double Fantasy. Story 56. A scuba diver photographing his wife during a dive off the Australian coast accidentally captured the dead body of Tina Watson, a murder victim who was drowned by her husband on that day in 2003. Story 57. This is one of the last known images of Manic Street Preachers guitarist and songwriter Richie Edwards. It was taken during an interview at his home for the Japanese magazine Music Life. 9 days later, he disappeared after a stint in 2 mental health hospitals. Story 58. This is Jimmy Savile. He was an extremely famous disc jockey and donated large sums to charity. He was also knighted by the Queen. The darker side of Jimmy Savile is that he was one of Britain's most notorious pedophiles who sexually abused children in many places. More than 300 allegations of abuse were recorded after his death. He abused children at hospitals he managed and even assaulted deceased patients. Story 59. Just some people at a house party in Salt Lake City. The woman with the veil in the middle of the 3 fundamentalist robe wearers is 14-year-old Elizabeth Smart. Mitchell and Barzy, the other 2, had kidnapped her from her bedroom a few months earlier. She was repeatedly raped and abused. There were many reasons she did not run during the few times she had the chance over the 9 months she was held captive. Possibly Stockholm Syndrome, but she later said she had been taught that a woman who had sex before marriage was spoiled. She was told, "Right now you are a piece of gum in a shiny wrapper. After you have sex you will be chewed. You would not want to give your future husband a piece of chewed gum, would you?" Story 60. A family was enjoying wildflower season and taking a wholesome photo. Just below the wife, a rattlesnake was mid-strike toward her forearm. If I recall correctly, the wife was bitten and survived, but the dog did not. The moral of the story is to check the tall grass. Story 61. Mark Jackson basketball card. In the background, the Menendez brothers are sitting courtside after they killed their parents. Story 62. Smudge the cat and that real housewife. I laughed at it until I realized the housewife pointing her finger was arguing with a group that accused her of fabricating her husband's abuse. The man did not blind her, but he seriously threatened her sight. He later killed himself. I am not claiming his suicide was caused by the abuse, but imagine living through both as a spouse. This woman has a child with him. I think she is okay with it, but I was amazed. It just goes to show what is hidden in an internet full of disembodied images. The cat Smudge really is that great though. He is a rescue. Story 63. Photograph of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary and his wife Sophie about to go on a drive. 1 hour later they were shot and killed by a young Serbian man named Gavrilo Princip. This assassination eventually led to the start of World War I. Story 64. This is a photo of the 3 unsung heroes who put their lives on the line to prevent the Chernobyl disaster from becoming even worse. If not for these 3 men, engineer Alexei Anonenko, and soldiers Valery Bespalov and Boris Baranov, millions of lives could have been lost during the Chernobyl catastrophe. 10 days after the reactor meltdown, the plant's water cooling system had failed and a pool had formed directly beneath the highly radioactive reactor. Without cooling, the lava-like material could have melted through the remaining barriers and dropped the reactor core into the pool. That could have caused steam explosions that sent radioactive material high into the atmosphere, spreading across parts of Europe, Asia, and Africa. In this photograph, Alexei, Valery, and Boris are fitted with protective gear after volunteering to dive into the water and drain the fluid near the reactor during the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in Pripyat, Ukraine, in 1986. The mission was successful. Although the damage remained severe, the 3 men prevented a much more devastating event, and all 3 survived. Story 65. This image shows Prince Andrew posing with an underage sex slave and Ghislaine Maxwell. Story 66. An army photographer captured an image of her own death from an exploding bomb along with her comrades. This is very sad. Report by the British Broadcasting Corporation. Although not a normal photo once taken, it would have seemed like an ordinary photograph, like hundreds of others she took when setting it up. Story 67. The start of the 1994 San Marino Grand Prix is one I still struggle to look at. Car number 2, driven by three-time world champion Ayrton Senna, crashed on lap 6, killing him. In the background, you can see the stalled blue, white, and green car of J.J. Leto. He was hit by another car, sending debris into the crowd and injuring 9 people. The previous day, Austrian driver Roland Ratzenberger had been killed in a crash, and Brazilian Rubens Barrichello was lucky to survive another accident. A seriously messed up race. Story 68. Stalin assassinated everyone in this photo. Photo borrowed from Intellectual Takeout. Story 69. On April 5, 2008, 10-year-old Ingela Höglund went missing on her way home from soccer practice in Stjärnsund, Sweden. A man who happened to be near the scene was testing a new digital camera on the day of the disappearance. Not expecting his photographs to become key evidence in a criminal investigation, he took a photo of Ingela riding her bicycle and another of a red Saab 900 that appeared to be following her. After the photographer came forward, police traced the car's owner, Anders Eklund, a 42-year-old truck driver. Shattering hopes of finding Ingela alive, Eklund confessed to killing her and told police where to find her body. Police took Eklund to the place where Ingela was last seen. He had no trouble remembering where he had hidden the body. Eklund said that killing the girl had been a chance event. They had not met before. When Eklund stepped out of his car to speak to her, she became uncomfortable. He said she allegedly kicked his leg, and when he moved closer she began screaming. He said he strangled her to silence her and dragged her into the woods. During further interrogation, police uncovered evidence linking Eklund to another murder in Falun 8 years earlier. 31-year-old Pernilla Hellgren had been strangled and sexually assaulted, and deoxyribonucleic acid found at that crime scene matched Eklund's. He confessed to that murder as well, insisting he had not intended to kill her. Story 70. Apollo 1 astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee prayed for their safety before the tragic accident. They were concerned about the amount of flammable nylon material and Velcro in the command module, so they took the photo as a gag. The story of Apollo 1 should always be remembered. Story 71. This one is called The Most Beautiful Suicide. At first glance, it looks like a woman resting peacefully, until you realize a car roof is twisted around her like bedsheets. She jumped from the top of the Empire State Building and happened to land in a surprisingly graceful position. Story 72. There was a tradition in Victorian England of taking photographs of dead people, often dressed in their best clothes and posed as if for a family portrait. They are unsettling to look at. Sometimes the whole photograph appears completely normal except that one person looks slightly off, which only becomes apparent on closer inspection. It is also interesting because it shows how ordinary death was in an era when people were not hospitalized for illness and when many children died in infancy. Death was part of life, and most people had experienced it directly many times, so recording it was seen as recording normality and as part of the grieving process. Story 73. This image was taken on board Air New Zealand Flight 901, which crashed into Mount Erebus in Antarctica while operating as a sightseeing flight. The Douglas DC-10 departed from Auckland to Antarctica and returned later that day. On board, passengers enjoyed a spread of food and cocktails while taking photographs and filming the view outside. This still is from an 8mm home movie shot moments before the fatal impact and recovered from the wreckage. Story 74. This seemingly normal picture shows a young child who later died after constant abuse by his mother. What makes it worse is that Child Protective Services were involved and did nothing. Story 75. The last photo of Chris Benoit taken a week before he murdered his wife and child. Story 76. A man stands shirtless behind a fence in summer afternoon light, resembling a photograph from a family album. This image is a recreation of the Time magazine cover from 1992, in which the same man, Fikret Alek, was photographed at the same place as in emaciated prisoner of the Trnopolje concentration camp during the Bosnian War of 1992 to 1995. He survived. The building behind him is now a community center with no plaques or memorials to the victims of one of the most notorious concentration camps in Bosnia. Edit. This turned out to be more interesting than I expected. Answering some inbox questions. Alex Wartime and Post-War Fate is described by Ed Vulliamy in his book The War is Dead. Long Live the War. He lived in Slovenia for some time and was deeply affected by the ordeal. I am not from Bosnia, but I produced a photographic documentary about the camps and killing grounds of the Bosnian War and their post-war fate, so I am familiar with the subject. I am hesitant to post my work here, but if you are interested, feel free to message me. Story 77. This photo shows Christopher Wilder. He was an Australian serial killer who abducted and raped more than 12 women. He was called the Beauty Queen Killer because he often abducted women from shopping malls who were models or involved in pageants and similar activities. He was not believed to have killed the woman in this photo, but it is still very unsettling to see. Story 78. It looks like two children wandering through a mall together. It turned out that the younger child had been lured away by two older boys and was tortured and murdered by one of the boys who had been holding his hand. If you want to have a bad day, look up the murder of James Bulger. Story 79. Charlie Lawson and his family, standing second from right. Lawson killed his family on Christmas Eve 1929 in rural North Carolina. Story 80. This image is of Ginger Meadows, an American model who visited Australia after being inspired by the movie Crocodile Dundee. She was killed by a giant saltwater crocodile at Cascade Falls, south of Darwin, in 1987. An article contains a graphic description of the deadly encounter. Story 81. This is the last known picture of Christopher McCandless, also known as Alexander Supertramp. While traveling around the United States, he went into the wilds of Alaska and was later found dead in an abandoned bus he had converted into a home. Story 82. Great White was performing just before pyrotechnics in the background ignited the acoustic foam. 100 people were killed in the station nightclub fire. Story 83. There is an image of a little boy named Garnett playing with his tractor. Innocent enough, right? Anyway, he is dead. His mother, Lacey Spears, poisoned him with salt when he was only 5. Story 84. This image shows Ian Watkins, lead singer of the former rock band Lost Prophets. He was later convicted and sentenced to 35 years in prison for serious sexual offenses against a minor and other crimes. The transcript of his sentencing is one of the most disturbing things I have partially read. Story 85. If you are familiar with Davi Vanity, the frontman of Blood on the Dance Floor, you may know he has been accused of grooming and sexually assaulting children, many of them underage scene kids, for years. Accusations date back to 2007 and continued as recently as a few days ago. There is a selfie of him with Jessie Slaughter, who was 11 years old at the time. Jessie Slaughter's relationship with Davi Vanity was revealed by an ex-friend. She responded like an 11-year-old by posting regrettable videos, but she did not deny the relationship. Davi and his bandmate Jay mocked her, posted her phone number on Twitter, encouraged his fans to harass her for years, and wrote a song about her that called her a slut, which he released on her 12th birthday. If you did not know the context of the photo, you might think this was an emo guy taking a picture with his younger sister, but he was dating, effectively molesting, her and then made her life hell for years. A few days ago, he was placed under criminal investigation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Chris Hansen has also been investigating. Story 86. This photo shows what looks like a few people in jumpsuits walking out of a building. In reality, it is the last moment the crew of Challenger was photographed, a few hours before their launch. The shuttle exploded 1 minute after launch, but evidence indicates the crew did not die immediately. They died a few minutes later when the capsule hit the ocean. Story 87. These teeth are on the side of a denture clinic in my hometown. The owner of this place killed 22 people in the worst mass shooting in Canadian history. This happened a week ago. Story 88. This photo was taken in front of Ed Gaines' house. He killed at least 2 people and exhumed bodies from a nearby cemetery. Story 89. This photo of Pavel Kashin shows him mid-backflip on the edge of a 16-story building before he fell to his death. This photo shows Tina Watson on the ocean floor before she was pulled to the surface. She was on her honeymoon in Australia with her newly married husband, who eventually pleaded guilty to manslaughter and received 18 months. He was then charged with murder in the United States, but the case was dismissed. I knew nothing of these two stories until I searched a name from another comment in this thread and came across a list of photos taken right before tragedy. Story 90. A group of teenagers arriving at a summer camp. This is the Workers' Youth League summer camp at Utøya, Norway, in July 2011. A few days later, many of them would be forced to run for their lives from a far-right terrorist who came to the island intending to kill as many people as possible. Not everyone in this photo survived. Some photos include adult politicians who visited the camp, which was for members of a political youth organization. Otherwise, the images show ordinary young people doing typical summer camp activities, unaware of the violence that would follow. Some swam away and were rescued by people at a campground across the water, who brought boats to pull campers out of the water. Others hid in various places around the island. In total, the attacker killed 69 people on the island and 8 in a bombing in Oslo earlier the same day. Story 91. This image shows then-President George Walker Bush reading to a group of students at Booker Elementary School in 2001, while his staff whispered into his ear the news of the attacks on the World Trade Center. Story 92. Sadako Sasaki statue with paper cranes. Sadako was a Japanese girl who became a victim of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima when she was 2 years old. She was diagnosed with leukemia at age 11 and given no more than a year to live. Sasaki's father, Shigeo, told her the legend of the cranes. She set herself the goal of folding 1,000 cranes, which was thought to grant a wish. With plenty of time in the hospital but little paper, she used medicine wrappings and whatever else she could scrounge, including asking other patients for the paper from their get-well presents. Her best friend, Shizuko Hamamoto, also brought paper from school for her to use. A popular version of the story says she folded only 644 cranes before her death. Her friends completed the 1,000 and buried them with her. Story 93. This photo of Samantha Koenig was received by her family along with a ransom note 2 weeks after she was kidnapped at gunpoint. We later learned from the killer, Israel Keys, that he murdered her shortly after abducting her. He put her corpse in his backyard, shed, and went on vacation with his wife and kids for 2 weeks. When he returned, the body was still well preserved because they lived in Alaska and the cold slowed decomposition. He then stitched her eyes open and took a picture of her dead body with a current newspaper. He also said he kept murder kits buried underground in different states. He would travel to one of these spots, kill a stranger, and then return home as if nothing had happened. Story 94. This woman hurled herself over the Hoover Dam after this photo was taken. Story 95. Dutch teenager Gary Slock and his mother, Petra Langeveld, took this selfie and posted it on Facebook moments before Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 took off in July 2014. A few hours later, the plane was shot down, killing all 298 people on board. Story 96. Back in 2007, I was looking through a photo album with my mother and sister. My mother covered a photo of my sister and me playing the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. When I asked what she was covering, she put the album away. Later that night, I got up to look at it, and in the background there was a man staring through the window whom my sister and I believe was a former stalker of our mother from before she had children. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.